Hello everyone and welcome to the latest GESS Talks webinar. We'd like to thank everyone for logging on and listening. Today's webinar is Creating Safe Havens, Safeguarding Practices for Schools and Online, a discussion that feels particularly topical in light of recent headlines highlighting online safety concerns. Our panel will delve into the multifaceted aspects of safeguarding, addressing both the online and in-class environments, and which I'm sure will be a fascinating discussion. We've got a control panel on the right-hand side. There's a Q&A tab there, so please do ask questions for panelists, as we'd love to hear your thoughts. And we'll try to address as many of them as possible as we can during the webinar. And if there's anything really pressing, we'll try and get back to you after the webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our amazing chair and moderator, Zen Kahn, partner at Zen PhD, to introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you, and over to you, Zen.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the lovely introduction. My name's Zen. I'm a partner at Zen PD. I'm also working as a senior consultant at the moment, supporting schools around the Middle East and internationally with various different trainings, including safeguarding, which is a passion of mine. We've been working in the Middle East now for a number of years, and we're happy to support schools with safeguarding training, well-being, and various other training courses via our training centre. I'd like to introduce our first panelist, which a gentleman called George Peterkin. George is the Managing Director of Mind Your Health, and they support with mental health, first aid, safeguarding, and suicide first aid instructor training. George, would you like to do a quick introduction?
Yes, thanks, and yes, hi everyone. As I'm saying, Managing Director of Mind Your Health. Background, I was a teacher for many years, worked in safeguarding part of school, pastoral part, and retrained as a therapeutic counsellor. So a bit of a unique experience when it comes to safeguarding with children and young people in our education systems.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'd like to introduce our next panelist, John Paton. John is the Assistant Head Teacher, Inclusion and Pastoral Care at Arcadia School. Over to you, John.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Paton. I'm our Director here at Arcadia of Inclusion, Pastoral Care and Student Wellbeing. So I broadly oversee the majority of the care for our students, trying to make sure that we have really coherent systems in place. I'm also our DSL across both of our schools.
Wonderful, thank you. And our next panelist is Annika. Annika Babu from GEMS Modern Academy. Over to you, Annika.
Thank you, Zen. Hi, everyone. So I essentially work as a member of the Child Safeguarding and Child Protection team at GEMS Modern Academy. I also, like I was telling George before, I do handle a few roles, but I just stick to also being the school counselor for middle school. Really excited to be here this evening and to a really engaging conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Annika. So we have a variety of experience with us today on our panel. And we have a lady called Rasha who will be joining us. Rasha is the Assistant Principal at Hekma International School. And hopefully Rasha will be able to join us during the session. There will be plenty of opportunity for the attendees to ask questions. So please do ask questions. There's a Q&A box there. And at the end of the session, once our discussion has concluded, we will then pop into the Q&A section and actually answer any of the questions that you have there. Now, I'm going to start with a quick question. So as advised by Sarah, safeguarding child protection is quite a hot topic at the moment with schools, particularly when mental health comes into play, and also the challenges that we've got going on around the world and around the globe in this technological world. So my first question is to Annika. Balancing student safety and rights is crucial. How do international schools ensure they are protecting the rights of children in their care?
Thank you, Zen, for that particular question. at the very start, I'm sure everyone agrees over here, child safeguarding and child protection is the need of the hour. It's always been, it is, and it always will be. And considering the different kind of challenges and the evolving needs that students have, it's all the more important that schools are essentially, they've got their game plan on to really ensure the safety of all students. So some of the different ways in which, the schools can protect or have been protecting the children on board in their care. Hi, Rasha. So some of the ways in which schools have been essentially supporting the children in their care is, through elements like to training the children, essentially helping them understand what are some of the signs of concern that they need to kind of be mindful of in their life, as well as of their friends around them. Really empowering the parent community as well, because whenever we're talking about students, we cannot talk about them in isolation. It is essentially a triage that is working with them, along with them, around them. So really empowering all stakeholders involved. So I would say the students, the parents, the teachers, the administrators, the support staff, really having those training sessions, open conversations, really kind of getting over the whole taboo element around safeguarding, and to kind of let them know that it is a concern. These are some of the things that we have to be mindful of. And therefore, these are some of the things that therefore we can do to ensure the safety and well-being of the student community.
Wonderful, thank you. George, would you like to go next?
It was fun. I met with the school today, and funny enough, Annika, we were talking so much about student training, staff training, and then I said, and how about parents? And it seems such an odd, not an odd thing, but like, oh yeah, we always talk so much about the students and the staff, and it always goes to that expression. I love the expression, it takes a village to raise a child, and it's actually, it is a community effort. We do so much in a school. I remember working with children 8 hours a day, boarding school, so it might be longer. And it's like, well, actually, they're spending a third of their time here and a third of their time awake, we hope, with their family, and a third of the time, hopefully, asleep. And I think that's a really big thing, Annika, that whole idea of what provision are we offering to parents as well, because parents are pretty much the same age as us lot. And so we haven't grown up with certain safeguarding things because we were never exposed to them. So no, I'm definitely with you on that, Annika, about actually what provision and what support are we offering to parents too in all of this, because they're learning along the same lines as us, aren't they?
Yeah, thank you, George. John, would you like to add anything to what George has said?
I think kind of taking on what both Annika and George have outlined there, and with the importance of involving the entire community in safeguarding, it really does take the village. What's very, very important in terms of balancing the rights of our community is making as much of our practice and our policy and our actual safeguarding in reality as explicit as possible. Nothing's more important to protecting the rights of people if they're understanding of and aware of the systems that we're using. And that's a very, very important thing that we need to do in order to make sure there are no surprises, and there should be no surprises in terms of safeguarding response. Everyone should be actively involved in those systems to make sure that they're working effectively. And that, I think, is pretty integral to everything that we do, and it kind of underpins all of our practice.
Thank you, John. And Rasha, what are your thoughts?
Hi, good afternoon to all of you. I second all of you. I agree that it's a community and everyone needs to be involved, all stakeholders actually. And it's important to parents as the staff members itself. They have to be always involved. They have to be trained as well to the policies, to how to, deal with such situations. And this is why we, for example, here in our school, we have workshops dedicated for students and same for parents as well. We try to involve everyone and to all be part of this as well, so that it can have a better effect the way we want it.
Thank you. So I have a question about online safety. And John, I'll start with you. How do international schools monitor and regulate online activities to mitigate the risk of children accessing harmful content or falling victim to online predators?
Well, I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we face in education at the moment, because the online world, the online community, and the risk factors associated with that are evolving so unbelievably quickly that it's very, very hard to keep track of our internet usage. From a school perspective, there are systems and safeguarding softwares and IT products that allow us to effectively monitor usage. How we extend that into the community and keeping children safe beyond the school setting is a little bit more difficult. I think a lot of that comes down to working with our students to understand how they are using the internet, and their voice as to what they're doing online, if we can access it effectively, is a very big kind of contributor to our understanding of the risks. From there, it comes to making sure that supervision extends beyond school. And there are a number of ways that children can be targeted. And the one that always springs to mind for me is the online gaming infrastructure, where the vast majority of students that we know are going online, they're interacting with people around the world, almost at random, no or very limited context as to how that looks, even things to do with well-being, language, those kind of things add a layer of vulnerability. If we can understand how the students are doing that, how they're accessing that, we can talk to parents about the ways we can kind of mitigate that risk, because there are very, very high risks in a number of areas with children. And then educating and building in an understanding of safe internet usage as it evolves to our students, I think is very, very important as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, John. Annika, what are your thoughts on how schools are mitigating the online risk?
So kind of building on from what John mentioned, honestly, this is a bit of a challenge that I think all schools are grappling with. I'm not going to give complete credit to COVID, but then once COVID hit and everyone really got comfortable using the internet and using online platform, it almost became primary. Like notebooks became like secondary, and now you have everything all happening on your devices. And we're talking about from primary years as well. And with that, of course, a lot of pros, and of course, the challenges that comes along with it. We as adults are a lot more cognizant and aware of it because of our experience. And these youngsters, because of they're cognitively still developing, there's such a strong need to be socially relevant, to be emotionally held. And oftentimes they think that the internet is a place where they're going to be getting all of this. And because of easy access to social media and all these reels and trends, and it's that whole FOMO element that comes in. So even if we try to kind of, let's say, be a little restrictive, be a bit more careful in school, like John mentioned, but what happens after school hours? So I think essentially then kind of building on from what John said, it kind of goes down to, once we figure out what are those platforms, what are those things that's drawing the students and the children online, and then having those sometimes difficult, but those essential open conversations with them and help them come out with the solution. So not like you tell them, don't go online, don't talk to strangers. The moment you say don't, they're like, well, what will happen if I do? How bad could it be? But rather, if you kind of have those conversations where like, okay, you know what, imagine a scenario. So we've done the basic talk. Imagine a scenario, you're online, a stranger approaches you on your gaming platform. They've got a really nice, interesting profile picture on, and they kind of approach you, have a conversation. Now, what do you think could be a best case and a worst case scenario? So I think pretty much having them reflect on it in this generation is probably the best way forward. It is a challenge. We haven't figured it completely out yet. But honestly, I feel that open communication has definitely opened a few doors for us.
Thank you, Annika. Rasha.
Yes, I agree, of course, with what was shared. I mean, it is very challenging, but nowadays it's something that is a big part of the schools. For example, in my school, we have a BYOD system, which is bring your own device. So all our students have their devices and laptops with them, and most of our books actually are ebooks downloaded on their devices. So it's we use it in every lesson, and for that we have a very good cybersecurity measures taken into the school. But also with all the measures that we have, we still have to educate and spread awareness among our students. So we do conduct different workshops. We have the Digital Citizenship Week as well, the awareness about cybersecurity, how to use the Internet Safety Week also we promote for it. So all of these together, like as a strong IT department with all these cybersecurity measures, along with educating the students and the parents and the families, they work both sides together parallel, so that you can have a safe, let's say, usage.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Rasha. So just a reminder to the audience, if you want to pop a question in the chat, we will be replying at the end of the session. We'll have plenty of opportunities for Q&A. So please keep your questions coming and we will answer them at the end. George, I've got a question relating to the challenges around mental health. What are the current challenges, especially considering factors such as diverse cultural backgrounds and varying legal frameworks across different countries?
So I will readily say, in terms of the legal frameworks, I will maybe pass the baton on to someone else for that, because obviously whilst I work around the world, the legality side not so much. I was at a school called Cranley yesterday working with year 8s. I used to be in charge of year 7 and year 8s. A friend of mine's at the school, and as the year 8s walked in, she said to me, "Oh, are these year 8s like what the year 8s are like in Singapore or Germany or Brazil?" And I laughed and I said, year 8s are the same across every country. I said, because they're 12/13, they're going through the same things regardless of cultural backgrounds. There's those nuances we always have to respect and understand and have that collaboration with, as all three have been saying, about collaboration with the young people. But these young people, regardless of the cultural background, they're going through the same things when it comes to mental health at the moment. So much of it is linked to online, because that's their platform, no pun intended, that's their canvas. But what online usage is doing at the moment, and I'm really glad, all of us sort of been agreeing with about safe use, it's almost like a petri dish for poor self-esteem and poor resilience. Those are two fundamental factors for a young person to thrive when they become adults. And I will gently say lots of my adult clients have low self-esteem and poor resilience because of the lessons they haven't learnt growing up. So for me, regardless of culture, self-esteem, resilience, and another big one for me is boundaries. Very, very poor boundaries for a lot of these young people. I've seen a question, by the way, in terms of when these things go online outside of school grounds, what's going on at home? Where's the boundaries? Where's the structure? So again, waffling here, in terms of going down the mental health difficulties, those are the factors. I'm not saying that our children are not unique, far from it. Every child is unique. But the things they're coming to us about, they cross over so much. They're all the same things, but they're just interpreting them differently. And it's just our job to give them a space to be heard, to explore it with them. I'm with Annika, but you could tell we're both counsellors. Don't tell them not to do it. Help them explore the benefits to not do it against the disadvantages, for example. And I'll leave it there, Zen. Let someone else talk.
Wonderful. Thank you, George. Annika.
Okay, so essentially adding on to what George was mentioning, one thing I have to mention over here is that now that our youngsters are using social media and the internet so fluidly, if that's how I could put it, the terminologies that they tend to use have become a lot more mature. So it's got pros and cons. I'm not putting anything down. I'm not going down that road. But you even have youngsters come up and very fluidly say, "I'm depressed," and then it comes down to, or I'm having an anxiety attack, and then it essentially comes down to you actually sitting them down and trying to figure out with them: is it depression? Is it sadness? Is it a change in mood that was brought about by a particular situation and scenario? Is it something that was ongoing, was long drawn over 2 weeks or a month, or was it just a day that was just not going well? Was it really an anxiety attack, or were you just feeling nervous about something? So the terminologies have become a lot more. I have so-and-so has eating disorder, or you know what, oh my goodness, look at him or her, they seem to have ADHD. And then you almost have to pause and be like, wow, that's a really big one. You've kind of done a diagnosis. I mean, what is happening over here? So as much as the social media has opened up the eyes of youngsters and us alike to different things out there, then it kind of becomes a bit concerning. When you're talking about mental health and when you're opening up the world of, you know, the online world, are we losing sensitivity or are we becoming more empathetic? Are we learning more about mental health and therefore becoming more aware? Or have we become so desensitized that it's like, oh, you're having a bad day, you're depressed. Well, you know, I've seen enough reels about it. It's not that big of a deal. So a lot of these themes, like George mentioned, are emerging. And so therefore, because, and so as educators, it puts a responsibility on us to kind of also keep up. We need to kind of keep up with them and be like, what's happening? What are the conversations that are happening in the online world, which is obviously a little different from our side? Like, talk to me about it, teach me about it so that I could meet you midway and therefore support any mental health concerns that might have emerged, or maybe it was just an assumption. Either ways, we support accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Annika. Rasha and John, would you like to add anything?
Sorry, Rasha. For me, what you said there is incredibly interesting, and I consider some of the language and some of the kind of self-diagnoses and some of the ways our children perceive themselves have evolved quite a bit. The biggest challenge that we're experiencing is kind of double-faceted, because culturally in this region, expectations on children, and culture in every region, there are different expectations, and there are areas of our population whereby parents have extremely high expectations on their children, and we have national statistics, and we have freedom of information, and we have all this narrative that builds into an expectation of a child that may not be realistic. And some of our older students are really struggling with the expectation of that, and it's very important that we work with parents to suggest that, look, this is a target grade, this is what's realistic, and no matter how much we work, and we will always do our best, this may be a wonderful outcome and achievement for your child. The other kind of expectation, I think, that's really becoming problematic for us is what our students are seeing, particularly on social media platforms, around what an average 15-year-old looks like, what an average fitness regime looks like, the average lifestyle of students in this region. Dubai, you know, we're seeing all these kind of lifestyle things are just not a reflection of reality. And when that's your exposure, and when that's your peers' exposure, we're hearing conversations and students placing expectations on themselves that's really leading to some challenges of their understanding of themselves and what's to be expected and how they should look and all of these things. And it's very difficult to kind of offset that. And we did a workshop with our students, and we showed them some images of some photoshopped influencers. And I said, do you feel that this is what constitutes an average person? And they said, absolutely, yes. And that's a very, very difficult thing to live up to for young people that are trying to find their way in the world and trying to establish their own identity and strengths and understanding of themselves. So that's a real challenge, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. Okay. Rasha, how can schools demonstrate that their safeguarding measures extend beyond designated safeguarding leads to permeate throughout the entire school community?
As we mentioned earlier, we need to, first of all, educate everyone, involve everyone. We need to have the ongoing workshop, the ongoing PD for staff as well. Professional development is very, very important. You need to have all your staff involved, highly trained and educated. You need to have systems in place, and you need to monitor and track these systems. And you need to also always evaluate the effectiveness of these systems. So let's say you have, for example, cybersecurity measures in place. you need to always measure their effectiveness and to see if it's working well or not, to track them, to have people trained on this as well. And in many schools, they have we all face this, like as a PD department, you have a certain PD budget, but you have to divide the budget to the IT department, the staff themselves, even for educating and workshops for parents as well. So all of these stakeholders that need to be involved need to be trained well for it to work, as well as the systems in place. You have to have a very good, you have to protect your network and infrastructure as well. This is also very important.
Thank you, Rasha. Annika.
To essentially add on to what Rasha essentially already mentioned, I think it's really important to ensure that there's capacity building that's constantly happening. Skill development, very strategic development of PDs, for example, like Rasha mentioned, to really understand what is the need of the hour, what are the needs of the students, what are some of the safeguarding concerns that are emerging, what are some of the signs and symptoms that the educators need to be aware of, because they are our first line of defense, you could say, on the ground, because they are meeting with the students on a daily basis. The administrators meet them maybe not every day, but we have our educators meeting them every day. So what kind of training are you kind of providing? How do you know whether all these training is actually effective, it's actually being impactful? So with regards to maybe some of the points that you might want to look at is with regards to how comfortable are educators and students in talking about child safeguarding concerns? How fluid are they in the language when it comes to, if there is a concern, what do I do about it? Do the students know whom to approach in schools if there is a concern? Do the teachers, do the educators know whom they can approach if they see some kind of abuse, if there's a concern, if there is even an issue amongst adults? Do they know whom to approach? Once that is in place, how frequently are concerns being logged? Is it once a term? Is it once a year? Is it once a month? Is it once in 2 weeks? How frequently are concerns logged by the educators? How frequently are parents reaching out to us and letting us know that we noticed, these two signs, and you had mentioned it last month in your webinar, and we were just thinking, maybe we're wrong. Would you like to have a conversation with our child? So these few signs and conversation would really give us an idea if the strategies that we're involving is being truly impactful. So from the language that the children and the stakeholders are using to what kind of actions are being taken on both ends, that would really show the effective impact of all the programs and policies that we would have therefore implemented in that community.
Thank you, Annika. Rasha, would you like to add anything there?
No, I agree with Annika. It's all, it has to be all in place. And yes, we need to have the proper communication channels with the parents and to measure the effectiveness from all sides, from the school, from the parents, from the departments involved, so that, as I said before, it's all about monitoring and tracking and tracking the systems that you have to be able to measure the effectiveness and to always update your action plan if it's needed.
Okay, thank you. George, this is a question for you. From a mental health perspective, what support systems are in place within international schools to assist children who have endured abuse or neglect?
So something I've kind of not learned the hard way, Zen, but obviously what, I've often crossed paths outside of this is that in terms of the international sector, lots of schools are very much their own kind of so I'd say they're kind of their own communities, their own islands, because sadly, there's not social services, there's not those kind of external resources. So schools really have to work on, as Rasha and Annika said, like appropriate professional development and having that connection and network. It goes without saying that at the very least, beyond professional development for the safeguarding team, but I also agree with both of you in terms of everyone has to be trained in this. They almost have to provide their own services. So making sure counsellors, and I'm going to wave the flag here, counsellors are not offered good enough CPD for them on a specific level to work with this. We kind of sorry to say this, we kind of just lump things onto the counsellor. If there's an issue, we'll just throw it to the counsellor to deal with abuse and neglect. But Annika said this as well about appropriate use of language. You know, actually, what things can we say? What things can't we say? But I'm finding this quite often in the international sector, that actually then the services and provision are fairly minimal, and that's not to blame. Organisations. People have to adapt and focus on things at their own pace. For those of us who've worked in the UK, we know the UK has quite substantial forms of contact, but whether they're effective, it's hard to say, right, with the waiting lists and whatnot. But in the international sector, it very much has to be for schools. What can we do as much as possible to keep the child safe within the school environment, within those hours with us? And again, that's linked to things, as Rasha and Annika have said, and you'll like me saying this then, appropriate personal and professional development for those people in those roles.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, PD, good safeguarding PD always puts a smile on my face.
Agree.
John, would you like to add anything?
I think particularly in international settings where you don't have as much access, as George has quite rightly kind of highlighted, to that external provision, you're looking to maximize the skills and the understanding of the staff you have when you're building a response plan to a child. And that really comes down to effective communication and how we're extending that to the experience of the child at school. Now, we may not be able to access as much counselling or as much specific support, but what we can do is build an understanding of what that child needs to feel safe, to feel happy, to restore areas of their well-being that might have been compromised, and then really build a culture of getting all staff on board to respond to that child effectively. And the majority of a child's experience is always going to be away from that specialist intervention because they're at school for all this time. And we have lots of specialist teachers here. We have lots of external providers. We have a whole vast team of people that are contributing to that experience and making them within the kind of boundaries of what's appropriate in terms of disclosure, aware of what that child might need from a nurturing perspective, can be an extension of what can be a very important kind of counselling response. And that, I think, is very key.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. So we've got quite a few questions coming in from the audience. Please keep them coming. We will have a Q&A just towards the end of the webinar. Now, Annika, I have a question for you. What is the point of having mental health first aid training in schools?
That's a really good question, Zen. I think it's some way or form we did kind of just dance around that point, but I think now we can kind of get to it. First and foremost, it's really important to help with the communication, because we have to remember that these mental health first aiders are essentially going to be seen as your first line of defense. Your first aiders, the ones that's going to be getting to you as soon as something, let's say if there's a cause of concern. So how essentially do I effectively communicate with the child? What are some of the things that I should be saying? What are some of the things that I should not be saying? That awareness is so important. And what we've also seen is that, again, with the fluidity of language and with the whole my right and this is what I think is the way it should be, now there's a lot more sensitivity. Again, it could go both ways, but it's almost like anything that you say, an adult might say in absolute innocence might be construed very differently by the youngster who's kind of hearing it. So essentially, in terms of what are some of the communication points, another important key of being a mental health first aid is how can I therefore connect with external resource persons? So you're not expected to deal with it from start to finish. You're essentially that first line of defense, that first person. It's like if you trip and fall, as an immediate first aider, if you have a band-aid in your hand, but you don't know how to remove that strip at the back and put it on the child, and then the child's going to be left on the ground crying, right? So the mental health first aid is like that band-aid that's dangling. You're the one who kind of pulls that strip and very gently places it in the child. And you're not saying that I'm going to solve everything, but essentially you're saying that I'm here. I understand what you're saying. I can see you're in trouble. I can see you're in pain, and I'm going to support you through it. And therefore help the child connect with the relevant resource person, whether it's internal pastoral team Then the pastoral team essentially kind of connecting them to outside members, essentially supporting in-house pastoral team with maybe like some PD sessions and having those important conversation with children. All this and so much more would only be possible if these educators and if these superheroes in the education system actually go through some mental health first aid, because I'm sure we all agree it's evolved. Even though we look at mental illnesses back in the day and now, the symptoms might be the same from a textbook perspective, but the way it plays out might actually even vary from generation to generation. That doesn't mean we reduce the importance of it, that we take away something. If anything, we need to arm ourselves even more with what is the most current, most updated things that we need to be mindful of. Maybe back in the day, if someone's sad, you might just walk up, you look sad, you're looking horrible, my goodness, just come out of class. And that might have been supportive back in the day. But now that's probably not the best things that you want to convey. So long story short, mental health first aid, I cannot even begin to stress on how important it is. And every educator at some way or form needs to be aware of it if they need to work with children.
Wonderful, thank you. George, would you like to add to that?
I was hoping you would, seeing as what I mainly do. I would say, without tempting fate, when I was a teacher, by the way, my very first inset day was by a man called Jonathan Taylor, and he runs a fantastic online safety talk. And I met him last November, recognising him from my very first CPD day 10 years ago. And I said, how much has it changed, John? And he said, it changes every year because the online stuff it increases each year. But I remember doing physical first aid, and without tempting fate, I think I've only carried out physical first aid 3 or 4 times in education, whereas mental health first aid, there's that big misconception that, mental health first aid is all about supporting someone with anorexia or with harmful behaviours. No, mental health first aid, 99 times out of 100, as Annika said earlier as well, is to help this person explore their feelings, maybe reevaluate their language use, this, that, and the other. But the whole point of mental health first aid is for 2 things. First off, wouldn't it be great if children just came to us when they were struggling? That's not always the case. Mental health first aid is to actually give us the skills, as Annika said, to recognise when a child is struggling and to come forward and have that conversation. The other big thing, I believe anyway, as a mental health first aider, is what does the course do? It empowers us as educators to keep doing what we're doing, and maybe just add an extra tool or 2 to our toolbox. Okay, I would just say this: what's the best thing a mental health first aider can have when it comes to supporting children and young people, and I'll say each other, because we also need safeguarding and to be looked after. It's all about the relationships we have with the people we're helping. Even if they're a stranger, we can build a relationship very, very quickly. But it's all about our strength as a teacher. How well do I know this child? Do I have that relationship with them? If not, is there someone else who can support? Because we're not working with students and pupils. This is very preachy. We're not working with students and pupils. We're working with children. We're working with human beings. For all who are beautiful, they're imperfectly perfect. But yeah, mental health first aid, I'm with you on this, Annika. And I'm not just saying this because I obviously provide training. It was the best CPD I've ever done. Honestly, almost 10 years ago now, best CPD I ever did, opened my eyes.
Wonderful. Thank you, George. Okay, so just a few more questions now before we go to the audience questions. So, Rasha, what avenues of support and resources are available to staff members within international schools who are grappling with concerns related to child protection?
Again, it all goes back again to the CPD, the continuous professional development. You need to train your staff very well. You need to have the right tools that they can use to help them. In regards of the mental health, I just want to add a point for Annika and George. I agree with you both, and I think it equips the individuals involved, and plus it helps for early intervention, so that if you know if you know how to intervene in it at an early stage, this promotes for a very supportive environment that can help all stakeholders involved.
Wonderful, thank you. John, what are your thoughts?
I think something that we can overlook at times, and I've found as I've moved into safeguarding as a safeguarding lead is, and certainly for our counselling team, is the ability to kind of get effective mentorship for those that are actually leading our provision. Because very, very often there are limits as to what CPD is available. There are limits to what external channels are available, and we are the ones accountable for delivering the training that turns into practice. And I often, and as we've spoken about already in the seminar, I'm exposed to situations that I may not have directly experienced before, or I may not myself have the expertise. Now I have colleagues and we can discuss that and explore our response appropriately, but making sure that your counselling team, your safeguarding leads, your principals have access to good mentorship from people that have significant expertise, particularly in some of our more challenging or serious safeguarding instances, is very, very important, because that transcends into our community. So I'd say that's a really key consideration, building on what Rasha quite rightly highlighted.
Wonderful, thank you, John. Now I'm going to go over to a question about governance. And we get asked quite a bit to deliver governance training, particularly around safer recruitment and advanced safeguarding training. Now, Annika, what methods are employed at your school to ensure that the governance has had a good, the governance has a good understanding of safeguarding in schools?
So that really does, I think we can kind of tie it to the previous question that you asked, Zen. So once you're trained, and considering you have a really strong a pastoral team on board, or you have a really strong safeguarding team on board, I think one of the first priorities is going to be to get the buy-in of all stakeholders, so that they really get an understanding of what is safeguarding. I mean, it is a buzzword, but is it really that big of a deal? So I think it starts off with that, to kind of really get that buy-in from stakeholders, from administrators, from SLT, from SSLT, from parents and from students, and let them know that child safeguarding is not something you want to kind of brush under the carpet, because you never know if tomorrow it's going to be your story or my story. So you really want to be on board with that. So once you kind of get that buy-in, once you've really conveyed the importance of it, once you kind of do it through capacity building, through strategic training packages or short burst modules, really kind of get that buy-in, then it's all about really making sure that your policies and procedures are now visible to all around school. Because if the governance really needs to kind of succeed in ensuring that safeguarding is like a very fluid concept throughout, it shouldn't be that one conversation that happens once a term or once a year or just around the audit. We need to kind of ensure that's a conversation that's ongoing. And we really need to understand the student body to understand what's going to be more impactful. And I think more or less we know the more visual something is, the more impact it's going to be having. So what kind of maybe posters are you going to be very strategically placed around school? What kind of brief information packages are you going to send out to parents? What kind of mini 10-minute PDs, like once a fortnight, are you going to have with the teachers? Just reminding them about, hey, this is what it is and this is what you want to be kind of mindful of. And then, of course, when you have new staff join in as well, that is a conversation that you definitely want during the onboarding process. It's not just about, here's your timetable, this is the stuff, and all of that. You need to really introduce the concept of child safeguarding, and therefore, even as new members of staff, what is your role? You really want to ensure that all your support staff members are also on board when we talk about child safeguarding. So from a governance perspective, you really want to ensure once that buy-in in place, it's kind of trickling very smoothly, very, very naturally to all the way down to the root. So even when we're talking about support staff, is the governance, is the whole administration doing their bit to ensure that you have language-friendly content that's being given to the support staff. So if they're from different native countries, are you going to say child safeguarding is this in solid English? Or do you want to therefore maybe make it more friendly for them? Because at the end of the day, it's not about just delivering it. It's about every single person understanding it, really getting on board, and therefore mindfully acting on it. So yeah,
Wonderful.
that's
Thank you, Annika. Thank you. So creating and embedding that safeguarding culture across the school. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the questions because I know George will be leaving us shortly to attend a training session. So I've got a question from Robert Fire. Thank you, Robert. You've discussed online safety as a world community gaming. Don't talk to strangers, etc. How do you manage situations where in school bullying, which can be prevented, managed, moves online out of school? So, John, would you like to answer that one?
Now, it's a very, very good question, and there's not always a very clear answer to how we navigate the balance between in school and out of school. The key first step is to become aware of the problem and get an understanding of what is going on, the students it involves, and the nature of what's going on. From that point, you can lean into your kind of school systems, because our contract and our agreement with our students, contract not being necessarily the right word, is an agreement to be respectful to members of our community. And our perception of that, particularly at my school, can be that extends to beyond school. And in our bullying policy and those kind of things, we need to reference that. What is key is often associated with this online bullying and this online negativity, there is not an understanding of the actual reality and implication of that behavior. So we have students that are doing this because it's funny, it's easy, it's a simple way to target and get a response, and we think of behavior as a communication tool, and they're not quite understanding the significance of those implications. Now, if we make them aware of those implications, if we highlight the severity and the response is not adequate, then we do need to speak to parents, and we do need to escalate things, and we need to use our school systems and our duty of care to our students, particularly the targeted students, to make sure that there is a response and there are repercussions or negative outcomes. And often we can lean into the fact that online abuse in the majority of the world is illegal. And the things that the students are doing, they're not perceiving because they still don't have that understanding of the repercussions of these things. So we're violating our school rules, we're violating someone's happiness and integrity, and we're also possibly violating the law. And the combination of those things and the education of our students around the information that we get, I think, is the key response to that.
Okay, thank you, John. So we've got a question from Mohammed. Hello, isn't firewall enough? No, unfortunately, firewall is not enough. And schools now have systems set up where they can actually monitor, filtering and monitoring system set up where they can actually keep an eye on what students, what staff, etc. are accessing when they're going online. Question for you, Annika. How can AI platforms be used to enhance education while ensuring the safeguarding of student data and privacy?
I really wish I had my IT lead over here, IT head, to really go in depth into that. But so are we talking about how AI is? Could you just go over that question again for me, please?
How can AI platforms be used to enhance education while ensuring the safeguarding of student data and privacy?
Okay, all right. So first of all, I think we as educators, I think we've kind of come to that understanding that AI is here to stay. So which means that initially when ChatGPT, for example, when it came out, everyone was scrambling what are we going to do? And children are going to be accessing it. But long story short, it is here to stay, and therefore it becomes all the more important that we therefore empower the student body with the knowledge on how to use it effectively. Yes, AI is there. You have your multiple platform, ChatGPT, you have your perplexity.ai, and there's so many different platforms through which you could get really good content. But how are you using it? How are you supposed to use it and not use it? That is something that we as educators therefore should kind of take that proactive step to really help the children understand as to the good stuff are out there. You're going to get a lot of things from AI, but when do you cite? When do you kind of acknowledge? What do you stay away from? What are some things to be mindful of? And when we're talking about, and therefore through that empowerment, you also have to let the students therefore know what could be some of the pitfalls that could happen while using AI. So AI just seems to be your answer to everything. If I need something, it was Google, and now Google can take a back seat. I've got other things that's way more current and updated. great, but are there any risks that could come along with it? Are any of your data being used by those AI platforms when they're giving you the responses? Therefore, what should I be therefore looking out for as a student when I log into a particular AI platform and get my research work? Do I need to check off certain privacy settings? It's something that we take for granted, but again, through constant conversation and just empowering students with that knowledge would hopefully go, if not a long way, at least a short way in letting the children know that this is important, it's great stuff, but then there are also dangers lurking. And therefore, while using AI, how can I celebrate, but at the same time be cautious while using it?
Okay, thank you, Annika. We've got a question from Kevin.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Zen. I'm afraid I need to jump off to deliver my.
That's fine.
Can I just say, Zen, thank you so much for hosting. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll all stay in contact. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care, George. Thank you.
Take care.
So we've got a question from Kevin. What are the cybersecurity measures that were mentioned? We were mainly talking about filtering and monitoring and putting systems in place with regards to what students and staff can access when they're in school. There's some great guidance from the UK government. Keeping Children Safe in Education has some amazing information about filtering and monitoring and how to implement systems. We've got a question from Mariam. She mentioned George and Annika. As mentioned, there are cultural differences between students, but they are facing similar problems. From my perspective, as someone from an Egyptian Muslim family growing up in London, I would say that there are some mental well-being challenges that really differ between young people, especially regarding identity and their place in the world. How can we as educators support young people through these specific transitions, especially when comparing to Western standards, for example, on social media, etc.?
That's a really, really powerful question, Mariam. Thank you so much for that. There's no one best answer at this point, but I'm going to try my best to kind of answer it. Cultural sensitivity is something that's really kind of screaming through for me at this particular point for that amazing question that you've put out there. So let's say let's say my background is a background that is completely unaware of, let's say, the Egyptian Muslim, a collectivistic kind of a community upbringing. If I'm completely unaware of that, and I'm going to try and support a child who is thereby going ahead and making all those comparisons of self with the Western world and self ideologies with the Western ideologies, there's going to be a huge, like a gap, and I'm not even going to be able to get to the child. So I think it essentially starts off with you as the helper, you as the person who genuinely wants to make a difference, to really culturally sensitize yourself, to really get to know where that child is coming from, what is their background, what is their culture like. Once you get that overall understanding, then to some extent you would be able to, you can't generalize it, but to some extent you will get to know from where is that child, what's the challenge, what's the struggle the child is facing. I mean, you could say just comparing with someone on social media, what's the big deal? But the struggle emerges because there's a clash from the cultural system or from the value system that they have been brought up with. So once you're able to sensitize yourself in it, then your conversations are going to be a lot more meaningful, because then you understand the concepts of togetherness, of values, of more respect, kind of, not seeing I, myself, and I, but probably we and us as, together, and then kind of use that knowledge to have those difficult conversations. Because when you understand where the child is coming from, it'll be easier for you to understand the struggle, therefore, they're having with the whole comparison. So once you make that connect, those difficult conversations where you help the child figure out, what is it about the Western ideas that are so exciting that's not matching with me, then that conversation is going to be a lot more meaningful, because then you'll be able to help the child, therefore find the middle ground. So I think in a way to your question.
Thank you, Annika. A few more minutes left now. Rasha, what type of workshops do you have for parents, if any?
We do actually. Okay. In terms of we do have like for mental health in particular, we have for cybersecurity, we have for internet safety, we have for all the platforms that we use as well. And going back to the AI question, we also have AI workshops for parents and for students and for staff, because it's a new thing that's coming and boosting nowadays. So we have to educate everyone around us to be able to know how to use it safely. So parents do. We first surveyed our students to know from them, because in this generation you would also know that they know a lot in AI, in terms of AI, and it's a big umbrella. So we did survey our students to know what are their interests and what do they like to learn more. And of course, we know from the teachers what's their usage and how are they using it. And from there, we act. So we did some workshops to educate the staff first, and then the teachers, and of course the parents as well. For parents, we have all kinds of workshops, and we do have from internal and external speakers that educate them to be part of our action plans and interventions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rasha. Quick question for John. How do we improve the relation with parents regarding academic enhancement of the student?
I think the key thing with parents is establishing mutual ground. And for the most part, our mutual ground is the interest of the student or their child. From that point, once they understand that we are as committed to the development of their child, and we prioritize that, you evolve into trying to understand what it is the parent wants, why they want that, and make them feel heard, because giving parents a voice in their child's education is absolutely essential. From that point, we can kind of offset where their understanding is against what their expectation is. We can lean into support, and we get that collaborative approach. But that mutual ground is the foundation for doing that. And often parents don't have the same exposure to education as us. They don't have the same understanding as school systems as we do. So giving them that opportunity through open dialogue and making that pertinent and relevant to their child is very, very important as well.
Wonderful, thank you. So last couple of minutes now, and I'm going to ask our panelists for some advice. So I'll start with Annika. A quick couple of tips. What safeguarding tips and advice can you offer to schools today?
I think quickly, at the top of my head, a few quick points is to try and work towards removing the taboo around child safeguarding. Really make that a common conversation point. So therefore have more short CPDs, more detailed ones, having more mental health first aiders on board, having more strategically planned lessons or discussion points for students, age appropriate content, having like visible elements around school posters that really have the children to know what should I look out for, whom can I approach, what do I do if the concerns arise. And finally, of course, your parents and all other stakeholders to really ensure that they are on board with the whole concept of child safeguarding and the policies and procedures in place.
Wonderful, thank you. John?
I would agree with that entirely. When we're evolving safeguarding, which we have to do constantly, I think when we look at it from a strategic standpoint and what we're trying to improve and what we're trying to enhance, it's important to establish what is our goal, what are we trying to achieve, and then importantly, what does that look like to all of our stakeholders? What does that look like to our children? What does that look like to our parents? What does that look like to our governor? What does that look like to our staff? And making sure that common ground has accessibility to every single level of person, because it is absolutely every single person's responsibility. And when you start looking at it a little bit more strategically in that way, it's easier to establish where perhaps we could refine things. Or Annika made a very good point earlier around the language we're using. Perhaps if the language we're using isn't aligning, we need to make it more accessible. And if you take that broad approach to it and split things into simple objectives, I think we can really enhance our systems and our practice and the safety of our students and families, which is the ultimate thing we're trying to achieve, isn't it?
Thank you. Rasha?
I agree, of course, with both Annika and John, and I think, yeah, it's mainly about establishing a clear and comprehensive safeguarding policies and procedures in place. It's also to foster a culture of communication and trust between students, parents, and staff. This is also very important, and to make it clear among all. Like, we need to always share the policies. Annika mentioned that it has to be visible, not only, like, we need to revise them, we need to involve even students and parents in revising these policies, and try to communicate among these policies all the time, just to make it clear among all stakeholders and to have everyone involved, and to prioritize. You have to have it as a top priority, like safeguarding and the well-being of students is on top of everything.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rasha. And I have some tips and advice myself, actually, for schools, particularly around the values and having shared values when it comes to safeguarding. When we live in such an international community, I'm based in Dubai, we have staff from all over the world, and often our own values can impact our practice. And this is something that I'd really like schools to consider. What are your shared values when it comes to safeguarding? What is the culture of safeguarding like in your school? If it's just a tick box exercise at the start of the year when induction happens, that is not how it should be. The child should be placed at the center of everything, or the children should be placed at the center of everything that we do in the school. So having shared values, having a framework in place, and sharing that with your community before an incident happens is really, really important. And I'm happy to advise schools if they need any support. Do reach out. I'm going to hand over to Sarah now from GESS. Thank you so much to our panelists. You've been amazing. It's been a great discussion, and we look forward to collaborating and supporting you all.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was really brilliant, and I think really informative and thought-provoking, and we can see it from the number of questions that came in that everything really resonated with the audience. So thank you to all our panelists. If anyone from the audience has any further questions or would like to connect with our speakers, please send an email to marketing@guesseducation.com. When you leave the webinar, you'll be redirected to a short survey. So please tell us what you thought and if there's any topics you'd like to hear about, as that really helps us sort of frame and direct what we put on for you all here. Our next webinar is on the 20th of March, and we'll focus on digital literacy, unlocking potential with coding, and full details will be on our GESS Education website. So without further ado, I'd like to say thank you to the panel and our audience, and we'll send the recording of this around to everyone. So thank you and take care.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Sarah.
Thank you.
Take care.